Everyone, it's Shannon here for Honeybee Stamps. In today's video, we are going to create an interactive card. We are going to make these holiday bells swing. This card features a mechanism that's similar to a slider, but this mechanism I demonstrate today is a little unique. I'm calling it a pendulum swing. As you can see, the top of the grouping is fixed, but still allows movement so the bells can swing left and right. We're going to start by creating our beautiful bells. I love this die set. This is the Layering Holiday Bells die set. It's just came out in the recent release and I adore it so much. I'm going to start by die cutting the largest bell out of some dark cardstock, and then for the topper of the bell, or second layer, I die cut it out of some really pretty mirrored red. Now for these additional elements, including the bow, I die cut out of some glittery gold cardstock, and then for the rest of my layers, I die cut out of mirrored gold cardstock. So here are all my layers die cut out and ready to kind of assemble. I'm going to do a tiny bit of ink blending. So on the base of the bell, I'm going to ink blend the lower half with a little aged mahogany. This will just add a little shadow and add a little bit more of the illusion of depth. Now that I've ink blended that, I'll then grab my mirrored red cardstock layer and just adhere it right on top. Then I'll grab one of my detail layers. This one is the glittery gold cardstock. Just glue that on. And then you can see here I saved that trim for that detail layer that I die cut out of mirrored gold cardstock and just adhered it right on top. And then onto the clapper, starting with the base, which is glitter cardstock, and then finishing with the second layer, which is a mirrored cardstock ball. I went ahead and repeated this process for 2 more bells, so I have 3 in total, 3 bells that are exactly the same. Now we're going to move on to adhering our ribbon or our bow together, starting with the mirrored cardstock layer, just adhering it right on top of the base layer, which is glitter cardstock, and then I'll finish with a little knot here, which is also glitter cardstock, and that will create this really pretty, lots of texture bow. Now that we've got our bow and bells done, I'm going to move on to this Lovely Layers Winter Greenery die set. Grab off the 2 kind of evergreen bow dies, and then I'm just going to die cut it out of this sort of olivey cardstock. I'm going to ink blend over the cardstock a little bit. I'm using pine needles Distress ink just to add a little bit of variation to the cardstock, to the color. It just makes it look a little bit more realistic. Once I finish ink blending this, we'll have all of our parts ready to go to assemble our focal point. So here are all our finished die cuts. I'm going to start simply by trimming off this little bit of evergreen at the very back of the largest evergreen bow section. We're going to use that to kind of balance out the greenery on the right side of our focal point. Now I'm just going to arrange my bells here and tuck the pine needles behind them here and there. As you can see, I can grab that little piece there and just kind of place it on the lower right side just to balance out this focal point. Place the bow on top, and once I have all these die cuts arranged the way I like them, then I'll grab a piece of press and seal, place it on top, press all over so I pick up all of those die cuts. And once I have that all picked up or all attached to the press and seal, I'll then flip it over. And now we're going to add some supports. I have 2 pieces of, 2 strips of white cardstock. This can just be scrap cardstock, and I'm going to adhere these 2 pieces together. And we are going to kind of cut these and place these behind all these die cuts in such a way that kind of holds this assembly of die cuts together. So you can see I'm just kind of cutting them and trimming this strip down so it kind of can hold these die cuts together. And I like to overlap. I'm trying to overlap the bells, go over the bells and go over the pine needles to kind of hold all those die cuts in place. Here I'm going to trim my strip down even more so it's even thinner, and I can place it behind in some of those tighter areas like around the bow and just where it just gets a little bit where the other strip was a little too thick. Once I kind of have all this adhered back, so all my die cuts are definitely now like one focal point, I then removed the press and seal. And now we're going to start to kind of put together the mechanism for this card. I have a mini brad here and glue dots. This is what we're going to use to kind of create that fixed element of the mechanism. I've grabbed off one of these glue dots here, and I'm going to place it at the top of the brad, or the head of the brad. So I'm just going to pick it up here and place that glue dot down. And once I get that in place, then I will attach it to my, kind of to the top point of my focal point. So at the back, but basically at the top. Kind of center, but doesn't have to be perfectly center. Just kind of make sure it's hidden behind all your die cuts, but nice and snug. Now I'm going to figure out where I want my focal point to go. I have a panel here that's a little bit smaller than 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. It's actually 4 by 5 1/4. And once I have that placed, I drew a little pencil line behind where the brad would fall, and then I punched it with a 1/16 hole punch and just punched it out, and then I fed the brad through, and then I've opened up the treads or the sides of the brad. Now we're going to move on to this awesome die. This is the Curved Interactive Sliders die set. I'm going to grab this little kind of curved slider opening, place it behind the bells, so you can see it kind of the bells are kind of covering it, but I'm moving that die up so it's up behind the meatiest part of this assembly, like the biggest, widest part of this trio. And then once I get it in place, I'll then grab, and it's hidden, I'll then grab a piece of tape just to kind of hold it down. And then I will remove the focal point, so undo that brad there. And then I can run this through my die cutting machine. This opening is obviously how the bells will actually swing from left to right. So now that I've die cut it, I'm going to move on to kind of stamping my sentiment. I'm going to pop in my focal point again. So again, feed that brad through and then open up the fasteners. And then I will move on to a stamp set. I did place a piece of tape down real quick just to kind of hold the bells in place where I want them. Now I'm going to grab this awesome Jingle All The Way stamp set. This stamp set actually goes with this Holiday Bells set, so the sentiments work perfectly. Place my sentiment down, and then I am going to pick it up with my MISTI and then do some stamping with some heat embossing. So I'm going to apply some anti-static powder, ink up my sentiment with the Honeybee clear embossing ink. After I stamped it, I'll then just dip it into some gold embossing powder. I do want to remove the tape and just kind of get my bells out of the way while I do my heat embossing. Plus I did get a little bit of stray embossing powder, so I do clean that up a little bit. And then move those bells, kind of slide them out of the way. That's what the brad makes that really easy. And then I'll just heat set my embossing powder with my heat tool. Now that my sentiment is done, we are ready to kind of finish up the mechanism for this interactive card. I am going to again use a piece of tape to kind of hold the bells in place where I like them, where they look prettiest on the front. And you can see here, once we flip this panel over, the opening where the slider is going to go, I have two really thin strips here. They're about 1/8 of an inch wide of cardstock, and I just layered them on top. So now they're just two strips layered, so 2 thickness. Then I'm going to cut this strip in half and then layer the halves on top. So what we'll end up here is with a very thin strip that is 4 cardstock layers thick. So then we will take this and trim it down a little bit more. This is actually going to be the little slider for our bells. I'm going to center it here and then trim it a little bit more. I want it to be a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch, and then adhere it to the center centered in that opening in the back of our panel. Now I'll remove the tape, and I just want to give this a test and see how it moves. It moves really nicely within that opening, so we are good. It doesn't like catch on the sides or anything. It just catches at the ends, which is where we want that slider to stop. Now I'm going to make a circle real quick and just hand cut it out of some scrap cardstock, and I'm going to adhere it to the slider, and that's going to be a stop just to make sure the bells don't fall out of the panel, kind of pop out of that slider opening. So now that is basically the main part of our slider is done. Now we're just going to make some more support. So I have 2 more long strips of cardstock. Again, this could be scraps, and I just adhered them together. So we have this little bit of dimension, this 2 cardstock layer dimension, and I'm just going to adhere this to the backside of the panel. I am going to be careful to avoid getting in the way of the movement of our slider. So you can see I leave the area around the slider free. I don't add any supports there, and I just continue to add these 2 stacked thickness cardstock strips to the backside of this panel for supports. And I even avoid the brad too, just to make sure the brad can do a little bit of movement even though it's basically fixed. So now we're ready to really finish up this card. Now that we've added the supports, we're just going to grab a A2 top folding white card base and another small panel here. Again, this panel is the same dimensions as the panel that the bells are on, so it's 4 by 5 1/4. Just adhere it first to our card front, and that leaves a nice little white border because it's a little bit smaller than our A2 card front. Then I'll add some liquid glue to the back side of our panel, making sure I'm only adding it to those support areas, and then I'll adhere it right down on top of that card front, and that will actually complete our card. I'll hold up to the camera here so you can get a good look at how this mechanism works. You can see how beautifully our bells slide from left to right. It's so fun. Such an easy interactive card to make, I think, overall. And I think it'll be a really big surprise for the receiver. This card just doesn't have an interactive card look. And I think it will be so fun when you pull it out of the envelope and those bells start to swing left and right. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.